Well, it came around, like all good ideas, by accident. I think you do walk into these, or else often you're running away from another idea. When I had done Electra, people kept saying, will you do a Shakespeare now? Maybe you should do a male Shakespeare. I'd done a lot of Shakespeare, females. And I remember Deborah saying, will you do As You Like It Again? I thought, I couldn't face As You Like It Again. And there was a lot of pressure to play Hamlet. And the more I read Hamlet, the more I felt it was about a man and his mother and his girlfriend. And I thought, well, I'm not going to bring anything to that a man couldn't do better. But the notion of Richard II emerged because Richard II is really not a girl, but is a sort of god. He's kind of, a lot of energy is spent by male actors trying to bring the femininity of the character out. And I thought, well, I'd have that for free. And so I could be female and yet deal with just the peculiarity of Richard II. It was like a book of hours. I think that was the idea. And I think into that I felt that I could slip because there's something slightly Byzantine almost about a book of hours. You are almost one removed. I was terrified about coming out and saying, ladies and gentlemen, I am Richard II, please believe that for the evening. But it wasn't in the usual Shakespeare style of the rumbustuousness of Shakespeare. We sort of almost withdrew him so you could barely see him. And I remember now huge discussions about whether you should never see him, that he was always behind a gauze. In the end, I became very moved by the fact it's really about a human being who has delusions about themselves, and perhaps this bumps into kingship or any undemocratic world where somebody believes themselves to have a rights and therefore somehow in the medieval model be nearer God than other people, how dangerous that is. But it's written in verse, so it's written in pure verse. It never falters from the verse, and it is written in the iambic pentameter from beginning to end. So it has a sort of musical, almost operatic distancing. So psychology is not the easiest thing to get in it. However, this shift of being a very flawed God in your own mind to a human being is maybe a journey that all of us make at some level, whether it's teenage delusions or ambitious delusions or so it is really a play about the interior of your mind, all of our minds.
These words hereafter thy tormentors be. Convey me to my bed, then to my grave. Love they to
I think quite subconsciously we were exploring gayness, which has 20 years later become a much less politicized exploration now, with the notion of presenting, a word that didn't exist then. I was a woman presenting really as a man, presenting as a female in relation to his cousin Bolingbroke, who was the man. There's a much bigger language for this now, so it may seem very naive, but at the time, we had great fun with this idea that Bolingbroke was the male cousin, having read some snippet that when Bolingbroke was with Richard II, apparently, when Richard was made king and Bolingbroke knelt, even though he was his cousin and an equal. So these two playmates meant that one of them, who was weaker, became the more powerful. And it's only a matter of time before the weaker would again become powerful, or some right of nature would take over. A tougher, maler, more masculine Bolingbroke would insist on being the king. So we had this huge history initially about Bolingbroke and I being incredibly intimate. The word lovers probably wasn't quite used, but what was interesting was when, in the deposition scene, to give your great love the crown and to kiss him, suddenly it was sort of a gay relationship between two men, but at the time in the theatre was a man and a woman playing it. And I think that probably played on the audience's mind at quite a non-political, but at quite a profound level, I think.
Unking Richard says,
and send him many years of sunshine days. I mean, I remember it as having to go to bed and stay in bed for 2 days with the misery of how it was received. People felt threatened by it in some way. Now, later we assessed that as being that with the history of the Royal Shakespeare Company, or indeed the National Theatre, that the history plays had always been some part of British history, and that they were performed as a sort of cycle to tell you something about the history of Britain. But of course the French had never had that problem. So I think we may have been just at the cusp of a weird republicanization of England that really wasn't welcome, but I think since again has just coincided with the time. You know, it's about a play, it's about a family, it's about power, it's about poetry, it's about loss, it's actually about sorrow. Fundamentally, the whole play is about sorrow, a very particular word, I always think. The playing of it was very hard because I discovered that a lot of acting comes from the history of your own life, your childhood, and I couldn't use my childhood for this because I hadn't had a childhood as a boy. So I found that really hard. Very quickly, I think we knew we had hit on something that we didn't quite understand. I think I knew, and my discomfort of in the playing of it was really that I knew that it was disquieting. And, you know, the vanity of an actor is you just want to be praised for everything you do. It's sometimes maybe more important to not be. So we were delighted when it was allowed to be filmed. This changed the relationship we had to the play, and indeed, you're now making a sort of semi-film about a thing that was a very theatrical event. I decided I should slow it down. I speak very quickly anyway, and spoke very quickly on the stage. I don't know whether time will tell whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it's much slower in the delivery in the television version than on the stage. 20 years later, I think it's exciting to hear it. It sounds very clear to my ear. There's definitely a difference in the delivery. Every word, every adjective and adverb has been celebrated in a way that modern backfoot speech just doesn't do. And I say that with no judgment, but to me it sounds clearer than I thought it was at the time. I think I may have felt that I was less clear than I would like to have been at the time, but now it sounds very clear.
Discomfortable cousin, knowest thou not that when the searching eye of heaven is hid behind the globe that lights the lower world, then thieves and robbers range abroad unseen, in murders and in outrage boldly here?
We were filming in a place called Three Mills Studios, which is down the East End of London, and has since become, it's got a lovely cafe now. At the time, I think we had to bring our own sandwiches. It was very cold. We were very disorientated. There was no soundproofing. There was a sort of echo in the place. So again, we had very little time, and we were doing it from scratch. Hildegard Beckler, the designer, hysterical at the lack of facilities for our costuming. And it was lit beautifully though, and we got on with it. And I just remember it being magical because we knew the play in the interior of our minds, but we were having to remake it entirely for the film. And I mean, the most dramatic thing is the last scene where I was in water, and we filmed way after the hour that we were meant to stop at 10 o'clock. So I think we went on to 2 o'clock in the morning. We redid and retook that very, very long speech. I have been wondering how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. It's an aria really, and really it was a whole film of its own. But stress is a very good thing for making films. There's a great ease when you watch it, because I think it has the truth of people being in a situation, but they were in a situation overriding an amazing amount of discomfort. I suspect that's the best way to be. Hollywood should learn. But it was a thrilling experience. It was a great thing to do. I'm very proud of it.